Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going through a series of video presentations I'm making for the Rankin Technical College Application and Web Development 1000 or AWD1000 Web Technologies course. And the two books used for the course are Murox HTML5 and CSS3 4th edition, and I've done several lectures already on these 20 chapters, and Murox JavaScript and Jquery 3rd edition. And in this book, I have done chapters 1 through 7 and 13 through 17. So I'm going to do chapter 18 now, then come back and finish up with chapters 8 through 12. Now, word of warning, this will probably be a very short lecture. Using closures, IFEs or IIFEs, the module pattern and plugin, this is something I guarantee you we will not get to. And even if we had the time, I don't have the expertise. So I'll give you what I've got, and here we go. So, as mentioned, we want to learn how to use closures, IIFEs or IFEs, and the module pattern and applications. Create and use your own Jquery plugins by using the module pattern. Describe how scope chaining works in JavaScript. Again, describe closures, IFEs, the module pattern, creation and uses of namespaces, the use of accessor properties, the use of the module pattern and IFEs for creating your own plugins, and the minification rules that are involved in using plugins. Now, this is an example here, as mentioned, that uses a closure. Notice you have an inner function that allows you to refer to the outer function's local variable. So I've got a variable, I've got a function inside of another function. The inner function has access to the outer function's variable. Alright, so as it says, returning the inner function creates a closure that keeps the variables it refers to alive, even after the outer function has gone out of scope. That is the idea behind a closure. And there are several examples that are given in here of using this. Kind of warned you, this wouldn't be very long. All right? When you talk about something being in scope or out of scope, and even the scope chain, remember that if you declare a variable in JavaScript outside of any routine, so if you declare a variable at the top of your program, that variable is automatically global. All right? If you declare a variable, and I believe they're giving you the right rules here, in any routine and you forget the word var, it's also global. But if you follow good practices and you create your variables as much as possible inside of functions, then they're local to that function. But with closures, if you declare a function within a function, the outer function, if it declares a variable, that variable is available to the inner function because it's technically part of the outer function. All right. So they go back and they redo the slideshow, and what's different here, and it's kind of interesting, is they add a pause feature. And the reason that that's interesting is if you end up having someone who is either not very dexterous and can't operate buttons very well, or they just need to have more time. I mean, this is a fishing slideshow. It could be anything. They want to pause it, restart it at their leisure, they're able to. And they show you the code for that. All right. The next things are IFEs, as it says. What an IFE and IIFE, and what I've done in the past when I've given this, and I probably have a lecture like this out there someplace, maybe better than this, I don't know. But if I type in JavaScript IIFE, all right, here's JavaScript in plain English. Maybe we can find it there. It says, hearing the term immediately invoked function expression, also known as an IFE, and suddenly feeling like garbage for not understanding it is perfectly normal, because programming languages are often littered with elitist terms. Okay, fine. Put simply, an IFI is a good way to protect the scope of your function and the variables within it. Scope might be a fancier term than it needs to be. It means where it can be accessed from. You'll often see IFIs used in frameworks and libraries like Jquery. They will often wrap all of the code inside of an IFI to protect its scope, the scope of its variables, and to make sure that everything is executed without the user having to do anything. Kind of neat. There's a normal function. Function, add together, you've got two values. The answer is the sum of the two values, and you log it. You call it, and you're going to log 40. All right, it says maybe this isn't desirable, and we simply want to call a function in order to get an output, and that's it. We'll never want to use it again. So it's a one and done, a one-time shot, whatever you call it. And we don't want our program to ever be able to accidentally access it. It says the first thing to mention here in the above example, our variables are safe because they're immutable. All right, it says, so that's great. The variables cannot be accessed, but how do we make it so our function cannot be accessed any other time? It says that's where IFIs come in. So the first thing we do is we wrap our entire function inside of brackets. Really, they're not brackets, they're parentheses. There and there with a semicolon at the end. It says this is actually the first part of creating what's known as a function expression. It says now at the moment it's not your typical function expression, in that function expressions will usually be anonymous. In other words, they normally don't have a name. How many more times do you think we can say function expression? Whatever. All right. Anyway, so because we are creating one of those function expressions, we don't actually need to give the function a name anymore, because the plan is once we've executed the IFI, we have no intention of calling it again. So we get rid of the name. All right, so when you look at the way it was at the beginning, right there, imagine that this is gone. Right there. So the only thing that's different is the name is gone, and we have the whole thing wrapped in parentheses with a semicolon at the end. So the author says, finally, we need a way to be able to call this function. But how do we do that, given we don't have a name to refer it to? It says, well, we simply add a pair of brackets at the end of the function, like so, what I call parentheses. All right? It says, and there you have it. You've now created your own IFI. All right? Now, if I do the same thing in here, and we say, and I kind of like that, this, looking at this JavaScript in plain English, maybe they have something also for a closure, or someone does. It says you can't get very far with JavaScript without learning about closures. It says you can muck around a bit, but when you really understand, or if you really want to understand what's going on in a JavaScript application, all right, it says not only do you need to know how the mechanics of what a closure is, you should know why it matters and be able to work with it. Closures are frequently used in JavaScript for object data privacy. All right. So they're saying that this might be a question that you could very well be asked at an interview. So what is a closure? A closure is a combination of a function bundled together or enclosed with references to its surrounding state. In other words, a closure gives you access to the outer function scope from an inner function. Pretty much what I'd already told you. To use a closure, you simply define a function inside of another function and expose it. To expose it, you return or pass it to another function. All right, I think that's pretty good because I think that's kind of what we talked about. All right, let's continue on. Here were the benefits when we talked about IFIs. Helps you keep your variables and functions in global scope. Helps keep variables and functions from conflicting with each other. can be used to create private state. All right. Closures. What else we need to know about closures? You can see, kind of like I just did, they're kind of mixing these together. An inner function has access to the values in its scope chain by reference. That means if the outer variable changes, it changes in the inner function too. The values of the variables in the function are set when the function is invoked, not when it's defined. So you get the latest and greatest. Pros and cons of object literals versus closures. Object literals, I love this. Pros, there's only one. It doesn't need to be created in code before it can be used. Cons, everything's public. Closures, the pros, creates private state. And that private state, as mentioned, protects the object's inner operations. The cons must be created before it can be used. And it can create more than one instance. All right. We can create our own namespace. What would happen is, imagine that there's three of us. There's me, there's Jim, and there's Mary, and all three of us are working on a project together. We're each writing our own code, and for the most part, until we put it all together, we're oblivious from one another. Well, it would be totally possible if we're working on an application for us to use the same name for a variable or for a method or something else. So, to get around that, we could create our own namespace. Put our own, this would create a new namespace. This would ensure we're not overwriting somebody else's, and this would allow us to use the namespace. So again, the advantage is we wouldn't have what are called namespace collisions, where two of us would be defining the same term where we'd be defining the same term where it would mean two different things. All right. The slideshow app with module pattern after the speed change is clicked. So here you've got control over how fast you're going to be showing this. All right. And again, they give you the code that will do that. Now, one thing that we will have gone and done by the time you see this particular presentation being at the end is you can go out to the Jquery plugin registry, all right, and you can find it. It's at plugins.jquery.com. I've never added these, but look, there is 1,000 right there, 1,500, 2,000. There's probably a good 2,500, if not more, plugins that have been written by developers that are out here. In addition, there are probably thousands more that are out there on the internet. The reason I'm telling you that is before you go out and take the time to build your own plugin, you should go out and make sure that something that somebody maybe hasn't already done it, all right, where you could grab their code because it's already been out there, it's been created, it's been tested. If you decide to create your own plugin, all right, as it says, it should be, to begin with, well documented, provide reasonable default values, etc. Here's a plugin that when you highlight a different menu option, it turns color. And they show you how you do that in here. Now, again, very simplistic example, and you could look at it and say, come on, somebody's already done that. Very well could have. All right. Here's a Blackjack plugin to allow you to play the game Blackjack. And again, the code is all given in here. I realize, like I said, you're not getting very much out of this, more than likely, and I'm not apologizing. I'm giving you what I'm giving you, okay? All right, Minification Tools. What Minification Tools do, if you've ever looked at Jquery, the minified version, all the unnecessary comments and white space have been removed. It looks like the full file is about 2 or 3 or 4 lines long, but the lines are unbelievably not long, but wide. All right, and there are different tools that will minify things for you. Quite often what you see is when you work on applications, you might take, for example, if you've got a lot of CSS files, you might minify them, which kind of squashes them. Or it's sort of like a zip, but it also is removing stuff anything that's not needed. They talk about the JS compress, which is just one of the tools. So it ends up looking more like this. Again, all unnecessary white space has been removed. And that's pretty much it. All right. So when I come back, I'm going to start back with Chapter 8 and talk about getting off to a fast start with jQuery. Be back with that shortly.